right, so hello everyone. My name is Amelia Attwood, and I'm presenting to you today on women's health. So this is a pretty big umbrella topic, but I'm going to kind of break it down as we go. Personally, I will have a connection to this topic that I'll share. My interest in this topic was the misinformation piece component of it. Since the age of social media, there's a lot of information out there, particularly a lot of female blogists. So I'm approaching the research surrounding that and where the RD's role is. And then based off three articles, I'm going to share why misinformation enables quality nutrition services and what steps we may take to ensure quality information. And my conclusions and takeaways will be next. And then any questions and answers will be held to the end, along with references. So before we get started, I'd like to have everyone in the chat box give me a thumbs up or a yes if you've ever been approached by, a female friend or family member about nutrition advice. Yeah, I'm seeing all the time. Yep. That's also part of my connection to this topic. Okay, I'm seeing lots of yeses, lots of good answers. Feel free to answer that, and that'll help me explain, just why I jumped into this topic and maybe why you guys feel connected to it as well. So I have an evolving perspective of women's nutrition. I was given the AMDR guidelines probably in middle school, and I was a competitive swimmer throughout college. So pre and post workout fuel was really impressioned upon us. And then essential oils for like swimmers' asthma was also a method that a lot of me and my teammates used. Diet culture amongst friends and family then became increasingly popular within high school through college. And I didn't really necessarily ever feel the need to take part in that culture because I was an athlete. I knew I needed to fuel my body so I could do my sport. But as college goes on, you get kind of sucked into these different fad diets in the sense of, oh, this is like, super great for you and, longevity of life. And I would definitely say trying things like dairy free, gluten free would give me kind of some disruptive meal patterns in college. And then I realized doing these elimination diets just to, experiment was not necessarily intuitive eating. So I quickly, began to recognize that and moved down a path that was more beneficial, I think, to my health and to understanding diet culture. So when I gave this presentation, I wanted to share the A&D article findings because the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is increasingly noticing, the impact of celebrities and just female figures that are making nutrition advice, but maybe it's with good intent, but not with best practices. So the A&D article findings show that members should provide consumer with evidence-based nutrition information. So kind of what we're all here for today, hopefully to pick up, nuggets of good information that we can continue to share with others. Then A&D members are also needed as a primary source of nutrition information. So this is promoting that dietetics professionals and dietitians in the media are important to inform the misinformed. And then A&D members will continue to work on outreach across professions to address health responsibly in physiological, psychological, and financial effects of nutrition-related misinformation. This piece is super important when you think about, why the internship even exists. We, interact with so many individuals across the board between food service, community, and the clinical world that it's an opportunity to learn from those individuals, but also to, tailor your outreach in the future to have, great patient outcomes and just healthier image around diet culture in general. So my first article is an analysis on the dirt on clean eating, a cross-sectional analysis of dietary intake, restrained eating, and opinions about clean eating among women. So the hypothesis here is that women who follow dietary advice from clean eating sites would be less likely to meet dietary guidelines, report greater restraint, and express more positive opinions about clean eating. The methods were a online survey, so there were 984 prior to exclusion criteria. With inclusion criteria, 762 women, 17 years old to 55 years old, that of Australian descent, were completed this Internet on Clean Eating and Women's Eating Behavior survey, online or in person, since the study did take place in Australia. And so the assessment survey included, they used self-reported data, so demographic information and social media frequency. Facebook and Instagram were of the media that they were asking on. Then they used a Likert scale to identify people that adhered to clean eating advice always, occasionally, or sometimes as the adherers. They identified the seldom adherers, which would be, not really. And then they identified the non-adherers to clean eating sites who never took advice from any of these sites. And then there was the food frequency questionnaire within the survey, just identifying the different food groups that may be lacking or adequate. Then there was the Dutch eating behavior questionnaire that identified different patterns of restrictive eating. And then there was an open-ended question saying, what is your opinion on clean eating? So from this Likert scale of interest, differences in women who have followed dietary advice from clean eating sites and those who have not was identified. So specifically, they're kind of focusing on the adherers in comparison to the non-adherers. So women who follow dietary advice from clean eating sites very often, sometimes were the adherers, and women who never followed dietary advice from clean eating sites were non. Those were our interest groups throughout the results. So within those results, women who followed and adhered to clean eating sites, showed a positive significance for their food frequency questionnaires, their restrained eating questionnaires, and their positive opinions about clean eating. So these women were likely to meet guidelines for fruit and meat. They reported greater restraint. They expressed positive opinions over clean eating, and they made up 25.5% of women. That's a lot of women following different dietary advice online, and that shows that there's a 25% gap of women that are wanting and seeking out advice. And then there's that whole other 75% from this study that, haven't really been given the opportunity to have quality nutrition advice. So discussing the main themes that came from the women's opinions over clean eating, they took the opinions and they categorized them into three main themes, positive, and three main themes, negative. This was done by a blind assessment. And the positive opinions show that the women believed that it promoted healthy eating when following clean eating sites. Clean eating sites improve health, and clean eating sites is an important concept. Those that felt negatively towards clean eating sites believed it increases food fads, is potentially damaging, and unrealistic to adhere. So as you can see, there can be kind of some conflicting views over what to share and what not to share about diet in our current society. So overall, this is a positively scored evidence analysis library article. They have certainly limitations, but the inclusion-exclusion criteria were defined, methods were in depth, and blinding was used for analysis, along with endpoints were summarized. The main limitations to this survey were that clean eating's focus on quality foods may be unattainable for food insecure. So again, designating the importance of the dietitian outreaching across the field to, social workers and community services. And then another negative would be that the study limited through clean eating messages may act as a catalyst for food obsession. So again, this is where that nice balance is important for sharing advice. Then another limit to the study would be Australian female population may not be representative of the general female population, which could be primarily true since the American population has about a close to 40% obesity rate within women in the same age range as the study. Then clean eating sites were not defined as amateur, professional, or evidence-based or not. This just means that the study was limited in defining if the clean eating sites that adherers were going to were something like the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, or they were something like Mommy and Me blog. So in conclusion, dietitians and the interdisciplinary team in action are needed to reduce risk of disordered eating and misinformation through advocacy for evidence-based media. Dietitians are key to facilitate nutrition literacy and empower self-sufficiency. This part is really important since people have to want to, obtain their fruits and veggies. Refraining from personalized nutrition advice on media platforms is super important since this can lead to elimination diets and different maybe negative side effects of advice. And then making referrals within the vast telehealth market. If people are excited about reaching out for their health and well-being online through nutrition advice, as 25% of women in the study showed, then make that chance to be a referral to a telehealth, telenutrition service, because obviously it's a convenient space to work from. So moving on into my supporting evidence for the next couple articles, I have here a kind of flow chart of weighed down by stigma, how weight-based social identity threat contributes to weight gain and poor health. So I wanted to identify this before moving into the next article because weight stigma is a social identity threat as mentioned in this article and as mentioned in some of the negative comments from the previous article. So that means that this can be damaging to mental health as, ideas of just as much as ideas of, disordered eating, or damaging to physical health as much as, the ideas that you're not getting in, a balanced plate. So finding this weight stigma is a social identity threat. I was able to kind of extract from this article some key points about the damage to one's mental health could be a reduced self-esteem due to, being part of that fat phobia within our diet culture. Then the lack of connection can also be damaging since people that are of bigger bodies can only feel maybe identifiable to, other people with bigger bodies because they've been kind of stigmatized and outlined that way. Then damaging to physical health for weight stigma, as much as physical activity is good for someone in any frame, it's often avoided by people who are in bigger bodies because it's a stigmatizing environment. So they're already feeling unwelcomed, and then they also have an increase of cortisol circulation, making all that decision to push past that stigma and not buy into it even harder. So I wanted to share this mostly because my next article shares Breakfast skipping in female college students is a potential and preventable predictor of gynecologic disorders at health service centers. So this article kind of, I think, feeds into, you know, women in college feeling pressured by diet culture and fat phobia, and to the point that maybe they're skipping meals. So the methods here are, again, another survey, but what they did was they modified the annual health questionnaire investigation of students' health at Kwanzaa University by adding several questions. So specifically, they added questions, you know, are you having meals regularly, and like listing off per meal every day, sometimes never. And then have you dieted before and lost weight more than 3 kilograms during a month? So monitoring that weight loss. And then do you have any troubles or worries with menstruation? What is your cycle, since that is a inclusion exclusion piece? What do you have pain with during the time of menstruation? And are you currently taking any oral contraceptive, since that was also inclusion exclusion portion. So from this study, the results state that when comparing those who have breakfast every day versus sometimes with those with menstruation problems and those without, the significance is there. So this is to say that those that only sometimes have breakfast and had menstruation problems was common in this study compared to those who had breakfast every day without menstruation problems. So the present study successfully detected a positive relationship between breakfast skipping and menstrual pain. Previous studies suggest that breakfast skipping disrupts the central clock system, leading to ovarian uterine dysfunction. So the discussion would be that preceding studies across the globe show that 40 to 60% of adolescents tried to lose weight, and that dieting was closely associated with menstrual irregularity. There's a study from Palestine University where students demonstrated skipping breakfast to be the strongest predictor of moderate and severe dysmenorrhea. Again, another study was conducted and pulled into this article, and the findings that Chinese female students also presented skipping breakfast as a primary factor of dysmenorrhea. So moving along with these results, this article got a neutral rating. While inclusion and exclusion criteria are defined, there's some methods missing of anthropometrics. Those were not populated. Blinding was not used for analysis, and endpoints were summarized. So the definition for, or the limits to the study was that the definition for lunch and dinner skipping was too strict in accordance to traditional cuisine. So this did not account for customs that maybe have a religious fasting. And then another limit would be that this was a single year survey, no long-term data. Maybe if they were doing this survey, you know, throughout 5 years with their students at Kwanzaa University, it might be a little bit more valid and reliable. The data also lacked any overall dietary intake patterns and emotional environmental factors. So this is where the definition for breakfast could just was not distinguished, and it could be distinguished between, you know, if they have breakfast once a week or 6 times a week, since that makes a big difference. So that's kind of where, you know, also seeing what was within that breakfast that they mentioned, whether it was, you know, protein rich or not, could, I think, be a very beneficial point of view. So in conclusion, again, dietitians and the medical team are really in action here to stay current with future research for endocrinology and diet impact, since there's a lot of new stuff always coming out about that. Implementing a similar simple screening tool for picking up breakfast skippers may be helpful at a college health program. And promoting breakfast skipping or breakfast eating among adults or in adolescents is super important, since the primary group within, you know, several studies in the discussion were adolescents that, you know, purposely were trying to lose weight and were affected by diet culture. So making sure that breakfast isn't something that goes by the wayside. So now moving into my last article, we've talked a little bit now about, losing weight by breakfast skipping. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about, where does being in a bigger body lead? So obesity leads to distinct metabolic signatures in follicular fluid of women undergoing in vitro fertilization. So this study was an analytic sample of 17 women. This was due to the inclusion criteria of them being patients of a fertility clinic without PCOS, CVD, or diabetes. So these women participated in collection of oocyte retrieval process and blood serum samples, which the blood serum samples are what kind of drew me to the study. The same women shared their anthropometric data and dietary recall data. So the results. I have kind of a fun imagery to the right that they kind of discuss a little bit more about tryptophan and how that goes into IPA being identified in both samples. But first off, the study demonstrates excess weight and or adiposity influence that metabolic signatures of human follicular fluid. So a sample paired with serum samples identified these biomarkers. Within these biomarkers, IPA was identified in contrast to elevated CRP, so C-reactive protein inflammation. So IPA in human serum is known for its free radical scavenger and antioxidant properties. And those antioxidant properties are shown to the right in the sense that tryptophan is deaminated and then Clostridium sporogenesis creates it into a derivative of indole, then a derivative of IPA. And IPA was identified in both samples of normal weight women. IPA levels are lower in overweight women. So this IPA antioxidant scavenger essentially was found in the follicular fluid and blood serum sample of normal weight women, which was found lower in overweight women due to the increase, or in contrast to the increase of C-reactive protein. So for discussion, overweight to obese women may have a decreased inflammatory response due to less circulating anti-inflammatories like IPA. So this affects the follicular environment during the preconception period, a time frame that makes it important for the lifestyle changes. Interventions could be necessary to begin to counteract systemic inflammation for proper oocyte maturation and conception. So this article gets a positive score. Inclusion-exclusion criteria were defined, methods were in depth, blinding was used, and endpoints were summarized. The only limitations I really saw were BMI as a body comp indicator was used. They tried to compensate with the bod pod, but definitely still, I think this made it a difficult component to the study. And then it was difficult to have a large sample since the sample volume would be those only eligible at the fertility clinic that didn't have PCOS, diabetes, etc. And within these findings, the dietitians and the interdisciplinary team, in America, there is a 25% of women of the reproductive age that are obese and are predisposed then to infertility. So although, IPA being an antioxidant to ovocyte development is not currently defined, the concentrations of IPA in the blood and in follicular fluid could reflect changes in the production and disposition of the gut environment between normal weight women and overweight women. So this could lend an environment for, lifestyle intervention in that preconception period for RDs. So just to summarize kind of the areas of impact we covered. So when I was kind of diving into this topic of women's health, this is the flow chart I started with. And I started with that first article identifying misinformation. And then we kind of got into that weight stigma can lead to like breakfast skipping and maybe anorexia and reproductive complications like menstrual problems. And then my last article, we covered a little bit more about how obesity may lead to metabolic distinctions. So, living in a bigger body could prevent or could cause, a lack of a inflammatory response due to chronic inflammation, which also could cause preconception period problems in the reproductive department. So my take-home message is this obesity and anorexia pendulum that the misinformation media likes to, I think, promote is that you need us as dietitians need to provide evidence-based recommendations and resources. So I'm a big believer in, sharing along the resources that you find and maybe your colleague finds so that you can put your brains together and share the most valid resources out there. Refrain from, eliminations or restrictions that support the narrative that foods are good or bad. That's not necessary in the amount of research that shows, a moderation. RDs are the advocates across the profession for diet that is balanced with colors and variety. So this is important, even maybe investigating a little bit more with endocrinology and how maybe any diet recommendations are given within an OBGYN office. Then RDs are there to apply healthy habits that can cultivate self-sufficient behaviors for mealtime practices. They're appropriate for approaching recommendations for inclusion for all bodies, and they should dedicate their time to at-risk populations as to empower the nutrition literacy of everyone. So to empower the nutrition literacy of everyone, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics National Nutrition Month in 2022, March of 2022 to be specific. This will be an opportunity to celebrate many cuisines as a world of flavors. And just a final research inspiration, I have read Rushing Women's Syndrome and Women's Code, both books that identify a little bit more about gut health and endocrinology that kind of, after my own evolving perspective, narrowed me down to this presentation you have here today. And these are my references. Any questions?